Hello and welcome to today's Business Model Bright Spot with Community Coalition. My name is Jean Bell. I direct the Advancing Practice program with the Nonprofit Quarterly. This is our second Business Model Bright Spot, and these are complementary content to an online series that we produced last year that you can still access called Mastering the Nonprofit Business Model. Session 2 of that series focuses on individual giving. And it has every definition and sort of compliance issue you could wish to learn. What we like to do with these business model bright spots is build on that technical content and get into somebody's story, a story of an organization, in this case, Community Coalition in Los Angeles, that's doing something really purposeful and intentional with their business model. Today, they certainly work across revenue streams, but we're going to focus especially on some of their individual giving programs and their strategies therein. Before I go any further, yes, this is being recorded. Yes, we're going to send you the slides, and we do that with every single Nonprofit Quarterly webinar, so you don't need to type that into the question box. But there is a question box, and that's how we're going to take your questions. There was great excitement about this session, so there's far too many people to do live, but we will be I'll be moderating the questions as we go through, kind of organizing and synthesizing and posing those to Leslie as appropriate throughout, but certainly we'll have plenty of time at the end to do a good, robust discussion. I also want to thank Leslie, if it's okay with you, before we even move on, I want to thank Steve Liu and Compass Point, which is in the Bay Area, for introducing us. I've been looking for business model bright spots, and a lot of capacity building organizations that have written for or partnered with the Quarterly over time have suggested folks, and it's been so fun getting to know you and to know Coco's journey. So I really appreciate a shout out to Steve Liu and Compass Point for the introduction. But let me make that introduction. Leslie Cooper Johnson is the Vice President of Organizational Development at Community Coalition in South Los Angeles. She started her career in local government down in LA, but has been at Community Coalition since 2007. And in that time has done a remarkable amount of work around revenue strategies, leading to over $25 million from government, foundation, corporations, and individuals. And as you heard in her title, what excites me about this conversation is that she also places a lot of emphasis in her work on building the strength of other nonprofits, teaching and working with other leaders around social justice fundraising and other elements of organizing. And your job right now, as I understand it, Leslie, it really involves resource development from both a human and a financial perspective. So I welcome you, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Jean. Good afternoon to everybody on the East Coast, and good morning to my West Coast peeps. So just today's conversation, these are some of the key points that we're going to cover. So looking at revenue through a social justice lens, Community Coalition is a social justice organization, so we'll be talking a little bit about that. Our approach to unrestricted funding, which is to look at it not as operational support, but to look at it as sort of money that we can be flexible with and really fund projects that we're excited about. We'll talk about just our overall fundraising strategies, some of the tensions around the nonprofit structure and the ways that we're being creative and working within that structure, and then also our fundraising culture and leadership development around fundraising. So
great. Yeah. So why don't you give us a little background though on Coco?
So Community Coalition, let's see, was founded back in 1990 by now Congresswoman Karen Bass. She's also the newly elected chair of the Congressional Black Caucus. And so the organization was founded in the wake of the crack cocaine epidemic that was really devastating South LA and a lot of urban communities of color across the country. And really the founding of the organization was to be sort of a progressive response to the war on drugs. So in our communities and in other communities across the country, the addiction to crack was criminalized, which is in really kind of deep contrast to how the opioid epidemic is being dealt with currently. It's being viewed as a public health crisis, which is as it should be. But unfortunately, when crack was ravaging our community, people who needed treatment were criminalized, and that led to mass incarceration and the breakup of families in our community. And so the organization was really founded to be, in direct response to that reaction and to push forward a more progressive response, which was looking at people not as criminals or not as victims, but as really the most important asset in the community. And so that's why our core strategy is community organizing. So basically, the Congresswoman, she had gone to a conference up in the Bay Area it was looking at the impact of crack on the Black community, and she was really inspired by that, came back to LA and did a similar conference here, and that actually led to the founding of the organization. And so, we really look at people first. That's like one of our core values. So our mission is, you can see it there on the screen, is to help transform the social and economic conditions in South Los Angeles that foster addiction, crime, violence, and poverty, by building a community institution that involves thousands in creating, influencing, and changing public policy. So really central to our mission is building a base of activists and involving everyday people in the solutions to the problems that they're facing, because we believe, again, people are our greatest asset, and so they are the best situated constituency to come up with the solutions. So our full name is Community Coalition for Substance Abuse Prevention and Treatment. So that's, not a lot of people know that. We're mostly known as Community Coalition, or even COCO for short. And so we've been known as kind of like the liquor store organization. So a lot of our early work was to look at the overconcentration of liquor stores in the community and how that was feeding into the to addiction and crime and violence in our community. And so we really focused on what's called environmental prevention. So when the organization was founded, the founders were like, well, we could become another social service provider and look at providing direct services to people in crisis, which is extremely important. But they actually decided to really focus on organizing and looking at the person in their environment and what kind of supports do they need to be resilient, and to look at like environmental prevention. So in a literal way, by looking at what is literally on our streets in our communities. There's liquor stores, there's check cashing places, there's fast food restaurants. And so there's that piece of the work, but also looking at the systems that are impacting a person. So we believe that if someone has access to education and a pathway to a living wage career, that they're far less likely to turn to drugs or alcohol when they come across, hard times. Similarly, if someone is able to keep their family together. So for instance, when mass incarceration was really growing and families were being broken apart, during the crack cocaine epidemic, a lot of relatives stepped up to care for their the children of the folks that were being incarcerated or succumbing to addiction, but they weren't receiving the supports and resources they needed to raise their families. So we were able to organize that group of people and say, if we can keep our families together, all the data shows that kids are best off when they're with their relatives or with family members. So how can we, put the resources and supports for those families so that they can do that? And so then again, if the caretaker is able to keep their family together, the child is benefiting. We believe that is a protective strategy against drug and alcohol abuse. So really looking at the big picture of what all impacts a person. So education, kinship care, and then also looking at shifting the debate on public safety and really looking at investing in prevention and intervention over incarceration, and stopping the reliance on punitive measures, and really again looking at people as the most valuable asset and really the most situated to come up with solutions. So that's how we want to see our organization. So these are our 5 core values that really guide our work. So community involvement really is about uniting residents beyond racial and generational lines. So in South Los Angeles, in the community that we're working in, really that means fostering Black and Brown unity amongst community residents. Education and training. So we really believe that anyone is capable of getting the skills and the tools that they need to create change. That it's not you got to kind of be born into it, or you have to have some kind of special qualifications. We believe that anybody can do this, and through education and training. So advocacy is around uniting people to advocate on their own behalf. Leadership development is enhancing the capacity of historically disenfranchised communities to, again, take the leadership around, fixing the problems that they see in their community, and really leading those efforts for the long term in a sustainable way. And then finally, contributing to the building of a social movement. So that's looking at the alliances and relationships that we engage in to build this movement that we know, by looking at history, that we know that's necessary to create the kind of change that we want to see. So just wanted to share a little bit about what we're working on now. So let's see, in 2017, there was the 25th anniversary of the 1992 civil unrest. And we thought it was a really good opportunity for us to kind of take a temperature check of our community and see what people felt had changed and what still needed to be worked on. And so we did a really broad survey effort. We talked to over 4,000 residents of South Los Angeles, and those conversations were, a good 20 or 30 minutes. So really, in-depth conversations, and that the data that we collected led to the formation of our People First platform, which is our policy platform that's guiding us for the next 2 to 3 years. The policy platform has 3 pillars. The first is generate justice, and so that's looking at a couple of campaigns around ending cash bail, decriminalizing traffic tickets, and also just overall promoting investment in prevention and intervention over incarceration. Demand our dollars is the next pillar, and that's really around agitating people to kind of, be empowered as taxpayers and say, like, this is the money that I'm giving, so I should feel empowered to say where it goes. And so we're really interested in making sure that public dollars are funneled to the communities that need them most through this lens of equity. And then the final pillar is build thriving communities. So that's addressing the built environment that kind of harkens back to some of our earlier work. So removing nuisance sites, looking at vacant lots and seizing those and rebuilding them, and then also revitalizing our parks so that we can have a community where families can really thrive. So the next
a lot of work, yeah. So we're going to share with folks what sort of the current revenue mix is of the organization. Do you want to walk us through that?
Sure. So you can see the breakdown there. That's our 2018 revenue, about $6.5 million. So 41% from government sources, 45% from foundation sources, and 14% unrestricted. So, and so that looks very different than what it looked like when the organization was first founded. We were started with a government grant, again, founded in 1990, and then we're, doing well with that government support. And then in the top of 1995, the Republican Party took over the House and the Senate, and about a year later, we lost about 90% of our government funding. And so it was a huge wake-up call for the organization, and our founder, Karen Bass, really understood the need in that moment to look at really diversifying our funding sources. So she took on the work of starting to build relationships with foundations, and we were eventually able to, grow our foundation funding, going from kind of, one-off like programmatic grants to looking at, multi-year grants, and now really having a good mix of both programmatic and general operating support grants from foundations. So yeah, the diversifying was super important, and we were able to obviously rebound, but that's just a huge lesson in our history around fundraising about, really wanting to diversify our funding sources. And then unrestricted funding, so you see it's 14% of our budget or of our revenue. So it's not a huge amount, but we're able to use it really strategically, and it's done a lot for the organization.
Mm-hmm. And we have a note there that the Galas is a significant part of that 14%, which is a strategy that we're going to bright spot in a second. But just wanted to stay here for a minute and think about, that trajectory is not an uncommon one, right? Of someone who's well connected, already has relationships with government, gets a government contract, but then sees that loss, right? Depending on who's in office, and then slowly building out to this bigger individual base, which, while 14%, we always like to say, most of us, that's much bigger than the margin of the organization, though. So that it's essential. The fact that it's smaller than the other two doesn't necessarily mean that it's not essential, right? 14% is 14. And as we're going to talk about, it also has other strategies embedded in it, right? So I always feel like people say, oh, maybe it's too much work for 14%, but it's getting us a lot of different things than just those dollars, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So before we get into specific strategies, say a little bit more about how you've approached unrestricted funding over the years.
So we've looked at it. So we don't use it for operations, and in the recent years, we've actually, set aside another account where we actually put the money in a separate place to really, drive that point home. So we see our unrestricted funding as kind of like our change capital. So again, so it's not a huge amount of money, but we squirrel away, and over time we've been able to use it for really, really important projects. So for instance, if you remember in our mission statement, we talked about building an institution for a community to use as a vehicle for change. And so some of our unrestricted funding, we were able to, grow it over time and then use it to purchase our building. So this, you know, the piece about being a permanent or being a community institution is not just rhetoric for us. Like, we actually wanted to secure our land, which is a huge deal in a place like LA, where it's super expensive. I'm sure it's expensive in other places too, but we're really having a lot of challenges with, you know, people being able to find places to live that are affordable. So so we were able to purchase the building and the land in 2010, and then sort of start again with our unrestricted fundraising. And then that also helped us kick off a capital campaign. So we purchased the land, and then in 2014 we initiated a renovation project. So it was a $5 million renovation. So we turned our building, which looked like a fortress from the outside, it didn't scream community center, into really like a state-of-the-art community space. So one of the things that we did was that we took our big meeting room and it was like dead center in the building. So you know, if you were walking by, you couldn't tell that there were 300 people inside having a town hall meeting with an elected official. And now that space is on the perimeter of the building with windows, and so it really is attractive to people walking by. There's a door there, so people can walk right into a meeting. And so it really, there's a lot of other features as well, but it really helped take us to the point where we're really having a community center that could be used as a space for community and lots of other folks.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, I was going to say, I mean, we probably don't have enough data to go into this in depth, but I just think it's so important for our listeners that, you know, that means that you've been able to, at least as I understand it, you've been able to keep a kind of break-even operating budget with your government and foundation and sort of targeted grants, right? And really think of that unrestricted money as you say, something to be managed very differently, as change capital, as investment in your own organization. And that was very prescient to be doing that 10 years ago or 12 years ago. But also it really puts the onus on how you're budgeting for those other things, right? To make sure that you're going into grants and contracts that don't lose a lot of money, so that you're not using that unrestricted for subsidy. Because what most of us are doing is using that unrestricted for subsidy, right? To offset the losses in those grants and contracts. So I just love the idea of bright spotting that point, which is, that's why it's so important to get full cost, you know, from those others, so that we can actually have our own change capital in the very hard work you do in raising money that's unrestricted, right? Of that money not just go right over to operations, but be able to be used in a special way. It takes so much effort to raise it. So it's just a key point.
Yeah, I think there's definitely like a discipline involved with, you know, squirreling it away. And there was, you know, it was a transition to, you know, from using that money as part of our operations to saying like, okay, wait, let's figure out how we can do something different that will really be kind of game changing for the organization, and building the infrastructure to support that. And so another thing that we've been able to do with that money is sort of kick off or initiate programs that we feel are important. For instance, like our dues paying membership, where you know, that wasn't something that was going to be sexy to funders off the top. So we can use those funds to initiate programs that are important to us, and then get them to a space where we then can fundraise for them. You know,
that's a great way to think about one's business model. And I gather that sort of knowledge has permeated at least the middle and senior management of the organization, that's how we use those kinds of funds. And that if we're raising this kind of money, we're looking for this, and if we're raising this kind of money, we're looking for projects like that.
Yeah, it's really exciting. I mean, just to have the space, and I mean, I've been working for Coco for 13 years, and the renovation's been, you know, it's like 4 or 5 years old at this point, but it still feels like, wow, when we walk in, it really does feel like you just have a sense of pride in terms of like all the work that went into like really creating this space for community, and knowing that it can never be taken away from us is something that's really special and important. So, and
to a large extent, it was built by community because it came, you know, from unrestricted dollars. Yeah. Right. Okay, so let's go to 2 of your strategies. And I love starting with the Gala because, as you and I've talked about, Leslie, galas seem in some ways kind of traditional. There's discussion about what's their return on investment, are they worth the effort, but they also have community building elements to it. So I'd love to, if you could just share a little bit about why this did become a bright spot for you, given how diverse your revenue was, and how you're thinking about it now.
Sure. So if we think about the kind of trajectory that I laid out earlier, so going from, you know, really fully relying on government funding to diversifying through foundation funding. So kind of the next phase for us was looking at, okay, how do we continue to diversify and also to access other other like sectors of, you know, of our community. So we kind of took a page out of like rich people's fundraising efforts and looking at this gala dinner model, like the rubber chicken dinner, right? So we knew that we could do that and access different sectors. So in LA, like the entertainment sector is obviously huge, the corporate sector, and then also looking at labor. And so we thought, okay, this is a way that let's try this out. Let's experiment with this. And so we really, so I wasn't around for the first gala dinner, which was in 2000. But from, you know, the sort of lore and the organization, like we were really advised against it when we were first doing it. Because folks were like, it's not going to work in the social justice arena. You know, it kind of belongs in one space and not this space. But we, you know, took a risk and did it. And the first year I believe we spent $30,000 on it and raised 70,000. So we cleared 40,000. So that was a huge success. And this year's gala will be our 20th year of doing it. So when we did it, so it was, like I said, it was something that wasn't really common in the social justice sector, at least in our community. And so we really wanted to make it our own. So we do honorees in each gala, but we have categories that we call the People's Heroes. So we've highlighted what we believe are community heroes, kind of lesser known community activists. And we have 5 categories for awards, and that's how we kind of organize who we're honoring. We also spend a lot of time crafting the program. And so what people say when they come to our dinners, what they love about it is that they learn about our work and they see the people that we work with. So as a member-based organization, there's always members at the forefront of all of our work. So, you know, the program for the gala dinner heavily features members who share their own stories and their stories of their, you know, their personal life and also the work that they're doing with the organization and how they're creating change in their community. So I think that's something that's really impactful for the audience and for people who come, that really is very Coco. Like it speaks to our values and the way that we operate. And I think that's, if you're going to do something like this, it has to reflect the organization. It can't just be like a cookie cutter thing, like, well, this is how they did it. There's, you know, there's a lot of models even in LA of different types of gala dinners, and they all work for those types of organizations. So you really do have to customize it. And so let's see. So the way that we raise the money. So we start off usually like in the middle of the year. The gala dinner is always in October. We start off with, you know, gathering a host committee. So those are some of our core donors and investors. We, you know, work with them to do some early fundraising. And then so that's kind of like a, you know, silent or kind of private phase. And then we end up having, later on, we have like a public kickoff event where we'll then say, hey, from these core partners, we've already raised X amount of dollars. Now we'd like to open this opportunity to you. And so it helps with people who want to either be associated with the people that have already given to us, like beyond me wanting to, you know, give to the organization. They want to be associated with the people who have already given, or sometimes they're in competition with them. So we can leverage both of those things in terms of, you're promoting who's given already and getting other people to join in. And then, you know, we do the traditional, we do table sponsorships, we do ads in the program book, we sell tickets. We have a silent auction that we do at the event that raises between $15,000 and $30,000 the night of the event. And that's fully, people can bid online. We've moved on from like kind of doing the paper bidding to the online bidding. People really enjoy that because they can also just do that at their table. They don't have to get up and leave the program to go look at the items, they get updates. You know, someone's outbid you and it's like this bidding war. People love it. So that's something that's cool. And then we do a fundraising pitch as part of the program. And so we really try to design the program so like the emotional arc of the program peaks right before we do the fundraising pitch. So that's really important. People know it's coming. And so we want to make sure that it happens in a strategic part of the program where it's not too late, where people are already starting to leave. But it follows one of our member presentations. And then we make sure that it's the person that asked for the money is someone that the crowd will respond to. So
those are great sub tips of this. And you talked about how you used to use a consultant to manage it, and now if I'm not mistaken, you've brought that in-house, which is also, I think, an interesting just business choice, and curious what that trajectory was briefly and what your thinking is on it now.
Sure. So we use different consultants. We used one for a good amount of time, and we fully kind of left the consultant in 2012. So it was a process. You know, they did kind of less and less, and they were training us. So since then, we've done it all in-house. We have added a production team that helps us now to kind of really, you know, up the aesthetics of the event and make it more professional. So we do that. But yeah, we do it in-house. And then,
and do people grumble? I mean,
no.
Okay. Well, again, I'm just speaking for the general audience, where there's sort of this thing of like every year we go through this wrenching activity of pulling this thing off and say, oh God, we're never doing this again. And then it's, you know, the summer again and we do it again. And there's sometimes that can get baked into the culture. Maybe you've been able to avoid that by your orientation to the event or the way you distribute the work. I'm not sure.
It is a big lift, but people understand how we use the money and why it's important. It's also a way, we also look at it as a way to celebrate the people who have been supporting us throughout the year. And it's a huge networking opportunity as well. So, you know, when we give our, you know, do our kind of division of labor for the night of, people obviously have a role like, oh, I'm at registration or I'm doing the silent auction. But then your other role is to talk to people, thank them for their support, meet new people and broker relationships. So I think people do get excited about that part of it. And there's a lot of work that goes into it, but that night is always a really fun night. And then of course we celebrate afterwards. So that's fun.
Right. So in your current thinking, as you think about go forward strategies, it's still a key cornerstone. I mean, it's raising half of your unrestricted revenue. You're not rethinking it the way some people are their galas.
We are looking at, we're just kind of trying to figure out what's next.
Keep it innovative, yeah.
Right. So we've been doing the gala for, this will be the 20th year. We've moved, we were at the same site for the past 10 years. We're going to be at a new site this year. So that's changing it up a little bit, but really looking at the model, like does the model still make sense? It does. I mean, we spend roughly $100,000 putting it on. And last year we grossed about $500,000. So it's still a good strategy for us.
Not to mention all the goodwill, yeah. So that's an incredible return, you know. And again, a lot of people aren't getting that. So you've obviously developed the capacity to do that extremely, extremely well. But we can take more questions about that. But I want to move us on to your community membership program, because this is another thing that I think a lot of people are talking about in social justice spaces, especially if they weren't born with one. You know, it wasn't a core revenue strategy to begin with. How do you acquire it? So you've got some lessons learned so far, right? So tell us a little bit about why and why are you doing it and what are you learning?
So our membership program it's primarily a political strategy first and foremost. So we really want to grow a base of politically conscious people who are invested in the vision and values and programs of Community Coalition. And it's a fundraising strategy secondarily. So our dues range from $10 a year all the way up to $1,000. So there's a scale. Okay. We definitely don't want to leave any money on the table, but we also want to make sure that the average, you know, everyday South LA resident can participate. And so again, so it's a political strategy first. And so we believe it's important when people are expressing their commitment to the organization that they give some money. In our society, giving your money to something is, you know, one of the strongest ways that you can show your support for something. If you're giving your money, then it's really like, okay, I'm in. And so that's why it's important for us as a political strategy as well. So we relaunched our formal dues paying membership program in 2015. So there was one before, but it kind of petered out. And so we relaunched it in 2015. We have over 3,000 dues paying members now. And we have a C4 organization. So the membership right now is housed in our C3 in our nonprofit. And we're looking at how do we move our membership to the C4 part of the organization, or the C4 organization, to have some more freedom with that revenue stream, and to house our membership and possibly our civic engagement activity there. So that's something that we're thinking about. It's, you know, we haven't moved there yet. We do, so the lessons I think I can share. So when we first relaunched it, we were, you know, in 2015, we were like, we're gonna have 15,000 dues paying members by 2020. And we were like, yeah, let's do this. And so, like I said, we have 3,000, and that's been, so, you know, we really just had to understand like the amount of infrastructure that's necessary to really run a membership program. So, you know, we were doing door-to-door outreach and getting a lot of success with people signing up. And then we were like, oh, well, now we have to renew these people because people were giving cash at the door. And so it was like, great, people were responding. And then we were like, well, wait a minute. That means that we actually have to go back to each one of these people to get them to renew. So the gold standard is, of course, getting someone's credit card or even access to, directly to their bank account to take
monthly or quarterly retain. Yeah.
They sort of like your gym membership, like you kind of have to opt out of it.
Right.
You don't have to keep saying, yes, I want to keep coming, even if you don't use it. Right. It's there. And the whoever you're going to the gym, they're getting that revenue from you. Also the infrastructure around what we're calling on-ramping our members. So we're not interested in just having 15,000 names on paper. We really want people to be active in our campaigns and our work. So what is the process? What are the different touch points? What's the communication that needs to happen with the person, excuse me, after they sign up for membership, so to take them on a pathway to maximizing their activism in a way that's meaningful to them and to the organization. And so that part of building that infrastructure is what really has taken the time and effort and sort of experimentation. We've also looked to other, member-based organizations that are in the social justice arena. Kentuckians for the Commonwealth is one that we've looked at and, had calls and they've been very, very gracious and open with, some of their missteps as well. And so that's something that we're still building, but it's really exciting. I mean, to have, sometimes it's like, you think about the 15,000 goal, 3,000 feels like, but, we had 0 and we came all the way to 3,000. And so we just have to keep, building that infrastructure. And once the infrastructure is strong, I think we can really ramp up the recruitment and get to that 15,000 mark.
And how is it affecting your structure? Like, where is that sitting? And you talked about potentially moving it to the C4, but even from its inception, where is it connected most to organizing, to fundraising? Is it crossing the two?
Yeah, it's so we have a membership department now. We formalized that maybe like 2 years ago. But what we're learning is that membership is an organizational wide strategy. It can't just be held in the membership department because of that.
That's what I was kind of getting at. Yeah.
So now the membership department works really closely with organizing, with civic engagement, and with our communications department. So we can look at how frequently are we communicating with members? How do we get them to actually come in to the organization? We're looking at a model called functional organizing. There's a great article I read called The Secret of Scale by Peter Murray. And he basically looked at the most successful member-based civic organizations in the United States and actually in some other countries as well. And he drilled down onto these 3 strategies, which is an in-person member community, a media platform, and some types of benefits and services for members. And that's kind of like the secret sauce to really growing a robust membership base. And it's based on looking at like the NRA, the AARP, churches, like how are they doing? Excuse me.
And I'm curious, and we can move on quickly, but I just think this is for a lot of groups, it's something that we want, and it's so many things to figure out organizationally and capacity-wise, as you said. In your current format, how do you articulate benefits to members? I mean, what are they getting and what are you getting in sort of the lexicon you're using now?
So when we have the membership conversation, what we try to convey is that if you're interested in changing your community, you understand the uphill battle that we're facing, the enormity and complexity of the problems that we're facing, and so you understand that solving these problems is not something that you can do by yourself. So you must join an organization that's trying to contribute to the building of the social justice movement to be able to actually do that. And so that seems to be, motivating for people. If you kind of lay it out that way, like, if you can do your activism on your own, but we're not going to get the kind of results that we need to see based on looking at our history where the big social changes have happened through social movements. And that's what we need to build. So there's that piece. And then, so when people do sign up for membership, they do get some swag, they get a hat or a water bottle or things like that. But we don't want to lead with that because we're not selling items. It's just kind of cool, and it helps promote our brand. If someone has a Coke on or whatever. But in terms of the functional organizing model, the benefits and services is really about, okay, once you've kind of got your core supporters signed up for membership, like your leaders and your activists, you've gone door to door in the community to folks that have a very direct, who would, stand to benefit very directly from the work of your organization, then how do you kind of like, for that next tier of people, what kind of benefits or services can you offer that can entice them to come to the organization? And then of course you would be charged with then keeping them and sustaining them as members. But it's a strategy for reaching beyond kind of your members. So it's like AAA, you can, if you can get a flat tire, someone comes and helps you, like it's that kind of thing.
Got it. And I'm assuming that right now you're not expecting this to be revenue positive, to be profitable. I mean, given that it's first and foremost a political strategy and you're, at 3,000 of your targeted 15,000, when you look at the financial data on membership and compare it to staff costs and the department that you're building, et cetera, you're not looking for a positive income at this point. I mean, how is that talked about?
No, I mean, we talk about it as a political strategy, and the importance of people giving the money is to demonstrate their commitment. And so I believe last year revenue from membership was between $50,000 and $70,000. So it's a good amount of money that we can squirrel away to again support strategic projects and initiatives. But no, the expectation is not that it'll be taking up a big chunk of our operating budget.
Right.
We talk about if we get 15,000 members at like one of the kind of median rates, then we could get to $1 million that we realize, but that's definitely a work in progress.
Great, that's really helpful to give that perspective. All right, so let's move on. We can take questions about that, but I wanted to, in our conversation about how you grow to over $6 million and own your own land, own your own building, and have a go-to gala and have government, it's just so much success, really, frankly, in this model, and so much place-based relevance. What are some of the tensions that come up around managing the business model? And so you were going to kind of walk us through some of the ways that shows up at COCO.
So I think it's really helpful that our founders looked at this as, forming a nonprofit as an experiment. So these are folks, Karen Bass and others, that were they had full-time jobs. Karen Bass was working as a physician's assistant at County USC when she was founding the organization. And people were doing their activism like after their full-time jobs. And so they were discussing like, wow, the issues that we're seeing in our community, they really require a lot more attention than we can give just in our off time, if you will. So the founding of the organization was really an experiment. Like, can we actually house our activism in a nonprofit structure? So I really like to, we just had a new staff orientation last week, and I really like to talk about that piece of the organization or that piece of the founding as a nonprofit experiment, so that people understand that I feel like when people think about an experiment, they think about creativity and not being wedded to, a certain strategy or tactic like all the time, looking at the different conditions, looking at how things are changing, and then adjusting to respond to those things. So I think that kind of language around an experiment is really important in creating a certain type of mindset and the way that you look at the work that we're doing. So there's definitely, boundaries and restrictions that, that come with having the nonprofit title. So we just try to be, aware of those and be creative in working within them. So we're clear that the work that we do is reformist work. We're not doing radical work within a nonprofit structure. But we make sure that we're connected to folks that are pushing the envelope in a way that we can't in the nonprofit structure, to help push conversations. Sometimes some of our staff members are like, why are we not doing these certain types of tactics? And so we have to kind of revisit this conversation. And so when you have your COCO hat on, like, this is what you're doing at work. But when you're outside of this space, then you should be maximizing your activism in ways that make sense to you. So, we encourage people to not look at the organization as their only space for activism, because we're clear about some of the restrictions there.
Can we stay there just for a second? Because I just feel like that's such a huge idea, and that you guys are talking about it openly in your culture and inviting people to see COCO as having limitations, as successful as it is. I mean, some cultures don't allow for discussion of limitations, right? So, I mean, would you mind giving an example of something that might be reformist, but a staff member or some staff members would feel like, outside of this, I need to be going further in my activism?
I mean, what I can think of is around criminal justice reform and looking at what the work that the organization is doing is really to reform the current system. And there's folks out there who are prison abolitionists, right? That are saying like, we need to end this right now. And so there's a tension there. There's, you know, people that work here that may espouse that philosophy, but that's not the work that the organization is doing. But it's by no means to limit what you're doing on your own time, and how we're also being allies to people in that space to work together and help push what we can do as an organization.
Thank you. That's really helpful. So this raising revenue and cash piece, what did you want to lift up here?
Oh my gosh, that was one of the most confusing things for me when I started doing fundraising. I was like, wait, so we raised all this money, we got a multi-year grant that's gonna go over 3 years. We have to book all the revenue now, and so it's like I feel like a hamster on a wheel with fundraising. I'm sure people's heads are nodding, and I can't see you, but that's, you know, just how it's like the fundraising just feels like it never ends, right? And so so I think getting clarity around our fundraising strategies, like how are we raising our revenue, and what does our cash look like? So we may have to book all the revenue for a multi-year grant, but it's cash for subsequent years. So how do we make sure that we're spending within our means, you know, putting away the money that's for future years, and, you know, putting it in a separate place and not touching it. So there's that piece, but then there's also looking at the value around contributing to the building of a social movement and helping to grow other organizations. So we often, you know, look at how can we use our positioning to help raise money for other organizations. So looking at going after funding, bringing partners to the table, and doing a lot of pass-through. So for, you know, sometimes we'll go after a grant and we'll only keep a third of it. You know, the rest is being re-granted to other organizations that may not be able to compete for that particular award for a variety of reasons. Like maybe their budget isn't big enough, or they don't have audited statements or something like that.
Sure.
We want to make, we're very intentional, and actually, you know, could do better in that space. And I'm looking forward to doing better in that space. But looking at how can we also support other great work that's going on around us in our community, and get resources to the organizations that we see that are having impact on the ground that may not be able to compete for larger awards, or, you know, the requirements that are necessary sometimes when you're applying.
Well, when you're a place-based organization like you are, and you have that much of a platform, it seems like almost an explicit strategy you could be employing, not just kind of catch as catch can, but it sounds like that's kind of what may be emerging, is that you have a lot of access across all these revenue strategies, but you know all the local players too, and what's emerging.
Right. So it's another level of relationship building and alliance work that has to take place. So that you're clear on what's going on and what people are doing. So when the opportunities do arise, it's not like, okay, let's get together and, you know, figure out a strategy. Like we're kind of already working in lockstep, and it's like, okay, this is something that makes sense for what we're doing together. And so that's another area of like capacity building, to be real. So I think we're making that transition, like you said, from being sort of reactive to being really more proactive, and in that space, and thinking about how can we raise resources, obviously for our own work, but for the work of other organizations that are doing great work in our community.
That's great. That's really helpful. We're going to talk a little bit about leadership, because it's so critical to fundraising, and leadership was a category in that 6-part series I talked about mastering the business model. We had a leadership and a culture section. So we've been addressing this question all through, and want to lift it up in the context of Coco's story and how you all think about cultivating fundraising leadership.
So looking at the culture of fundraising, I think one of the important lessons I learned, so like I said, I've been here for 13 years. I came on as a grant writer, and then moved to development coordinator, then development director, and then I joined the executive team maybe like 4 or 5 years ago. And it was really like an important lesson for me, was like the difference between a relational and transactional interactions with funders, and being clear about which one is which, and as you're entering into a relationship, being clear about which kind of relationship it is. So there's funders where we have a lot of, you know, alignment in terms of our missions and the work that we want to do, and you know, the outcomes that we want to achieve. And so if you approach those relationships, you know, really actually building a relationship and not going into a transaction. So, some of our funding is more transactional, and knowing the difference between the two can really help you allocate your time and your resources accordingly. So I don't need to spend a lot, as much time with someone where I know it's going to be a transaction. Like, they're getting something out of giving us money, whether it's some kind of publicity or, being able to say, hey, we check the box on like giving to a community organization or whatever it is. And we'll take that money and we'll do something good with it. But then on the other side, there's, relationships that have spanned, over years, where there's multi-year funding, there's general operating support, and how do you approach those relationships? Then also, how do you establish new ones? So we're also, working on being able to forecast more in terms of our fundraising planning. So, at a good time, we can look at 2 to 3 years out. But what about 5 years? What about 10 years? Who are the people that we need to, be kind of stalking, if you will, at a conference today, so that we can be talking about getting a grant for next year or the year after that. So, but if you can identify those partners, it'll really help you determine which strategies to employ in those relationships. So
I love the idea of coaching people about that too. You talked about your trajectory, and we don't always talk like that with people, that actually funders are different. We have different levels of relationship, and coaching people to discern those so that they're, as you said, allocating the proper amount of time to relationship cultivation and not treating everybody as if they have the same investment in the organization, because they don't, right?
That's right. Yeah. Even the transactional relationships are still guided by our values. So, for instance, like I said, our full name is Community Coalition for Substance Abuse Prevention and Treatment. So we don't take money from the alcohol industry. We never have. We probably never will. So right now we're also grappling with the cannabis industry. So as of right now, we haven't accepted money from the cannabis industry because we haven't, had the conversations internally and looking at our values and looking at the impact that the industry is having on the community to determine whether that is something that we can do according to our values. So.
Boy, and that's so interesting, because of course right now it feels so radically unfair that people are now profiting, right, when people were in prison for it. So is there some timeline at which that one might need to be revisited if we continue to make, inroads from a justice standpoint? That's tricky.
Yeah, yes, it is.
To say the least.
Right.
Okay, second one here.
Yeah, so the organizing approach to grassroots fundraising. So we talk to our staff and really engage them around looking at fundraising as one of the core roles of an organizer. And we help people understand that, it can be really difficult. We're a, predominantly people of color organization serving a Black and brown community. And a lot of us didn't grow up talking about money. Our earliest interactions with money are, mostly negative, where there wasn't enough of it, there was shame around it. And so then being faced with the, then I come in and I'm like, yeah, you need to ask, your member or the person that you're working with for membership dues. It's like, I can't ask this person that I know is struggling to make ends meet for money. And so there's a lot of the training is kind of unlearning things that we've learned in the past, and then replacing those ideas with new ones. And so we really have to talk about membership and grassroots fundraising as offering someone an opportunity to be involved in something that's going to be beneficial to them and to their community. And, we talk about success in fundraising as asking. You should take some time to set the stage for the person, and hopefully their answer will be yes. But it's a numbers game, right? So you're going to hear a lot of no's. And so you can't personalize the no's. You have to take them, and also be able to discern the difference between a not now and a no, because those are different things. And
a real not now, and a fake not now.
Right. There's nuances there.
Yeah.
But it's I think I know the exercise around like kind of going back and thinking about your first memories of money. This is something I was trained on through GIFT, which is the Grassroots Institute for Fundraising Training, their amazing Encompass point that we talked about before, and really helping people to understand that, that they're actually being offered an opportunity and an opportunity to invest in something that's greater than them. And so, you know, the other thing is that people just have to be, you have to kind of get over your fear, and your excitement and kind of dedication to what's going on here has to be greater than your fear of hearing a no. We do have to
really helpful.
Yeah, so there's a lot of training that we do to help people make that transition from looking at, you know, asking for money as like begging or being offensive to actually being something that's empowering. And in fact, like when you're not asking someone for money, you're actually kind of disrespecting them by, first of all, making a decision on their behalf, like, no, they can't afford this, like they can't do this, like that's not up to you. Your job is to ask for that support and make a good case about why it'll be beneficial, and then allow the person to make that decision. And that's really so we frame it in terms of it's an organizing, it's an important piece of organizing, and also empowering a community that has really not had a lot of power in terms of directing resources and how they're going to be used in their community. And so we do a lot of training around grassroots fundraising, asking for membership, asking, you know, doing selling tickets and sponsorships and so forth for the gala. Just not grassroots, but it also gives our organizers, you know, opportunities to practice, because that's really important.
Yeah, it feels like a lower bar than just asking for a straight up cash gift with no dinner associated with it or what have you.
Right. There's no like immediate, like kind of tangible, like here, and you get this table or this whatever. It's like, you know, you're actually, you know, contributing to a movement and to base building.
Let's talk a little bit about what COCO's approach has been to developing senior staff in development and its related activities. You shared your own trajectory. How do you think about it?
So we've actually had a lot of success with developing development leadership from within the organization. So especially with writing about like you have to really understand what organizing is, and you really have to have an in-depth understanding of all the different programs that we have, because making a good case to a funder is really about knowing the work well enough, and then knowing what the funder's story is, right? Why are they in it? And then connecting those two things. And so that's like, as I've, you know, been in development longer and longer, to me, like that's what I understand, that's actually the skill. The skill isn't the technical writing, because you can train someone to do that. There's plenty of programs where you can go and, you know, this is how you write a problem statement. This is how you craft an outcome. It's a SMART objective. All of those things can be taught, but it's much harder to teach someone what organizing is and why it is that we believe that it's the best strategy in terms of creating the big, you know, long-lasting changes that we want to see. So I think, you know, being able to grow that capacity from within the organization is really where we've had the most success, versus, you know, kind of bringing someone in who's like, yeah, I've written 100 grants, but they don't understand organizing. I'm going to have more success with someone who really understands organizing, and I can work with them on their writing, on like the technical pieces of it. So I think it's, you know, being embedded in the values and the work, and having the passion, because I mean, to be honest, like now there's, you know, a lot of professional programs for fundraisers, and you can actually go through, you know, a program and be a fundraiser. But I feel like a lot of people get to fundraising because of their passion for the organization and the mission. And so it's not necessarily something that I would want to go somewhere else and do, because it is, you know, stressful. It's that hamster on the wheel. It's a lot of work, a lot of hearing no. So if you can have that passion and commitment, and then the understanding of the core strategy, like that's really what we're looking for as we're developing people that are going to be able to communicate our work to funders.
Yeah, I feel like I want to mention the piece we did that your colleague Jerry was profiled in, who's now, I think, development director, right? Or yeah, yes. Who also came in maybe more at a middle management level. Rockwood Leadership is doing a special cohort fellowship for social justice fundraisers. So that's something you can look up on the MTQ site, or obviously on the Rockwood site. But when we interviewed folks, including Jerry, that's what they said, is that, you know, as rewarding as this can be, the challenges of it, both tactical and emotional, et cetera, are really actually kind of high. And the only way it really works for them is to be doing it inside a movement or a community that's super important to them. So most of them were talking about it, not that they haven't built the technical skills, they have, but it's not like they're trying to transfer them anywhere they might get hired. They're trying to put them to even greater use in the movement they care the most about. Well, we are almost out of time, so I'm going to let you kind of summarize what you see as kind of key takeaways from this conversation about social justice business models.
So key takeaways for me is just really staying rooted in your core values and using them as the guidepost for decision making and strategy development. Looking at nonprofit work with the lens of experimentation, I think has been really game changing for me. But of course, making sure that the experimentation is controlled, where you have a hypothesis, you have some ideas around evaluation and measuring, so that you're also tracking, like, okay, we're going to try this, and then in a certain amount of time, we're going to check on it, and if it doesn't work, we need to change it. So if you're going to experiment, it can't just be like, we're going to try this, and all of a sudden a year has gone by, and you've been doing something that hasn't been working. And then the relational versus transactional piece, again, just be really clear about those categories, and then allocating your resources accordingly.
Thank you for that. And just so people know, as we close out, there were a lot of questions, but the questions were almost all about the gala and about sort of the math of the gala, which doesn't surprise me. I think people are engrossed in the story, but when they get to this sort of technical question, everyone wants to know about, well, did you factor in staff time and all those things? I guess what I would say about that is, I think, again, we don't have all of that data here, but what we do know is that you are very careful about that event producing a significant margin for the organization. But I also want to say about that, though, is that we're not talking about that strategy too, not as much as the membership program maybe, but that strategy has a lot of other intended benefits besides profit.
That's right.
The gala that is. And so part of the sophistication, I think, for all of us, especially if we're going to actively apply these values and our social justice values, is to come up with other metrics of return on investment that we can be rigorous about. They may be qualitative or they may be sort of process oriented, but we are comfortable with what they're telling us about why we're still doing this, and that we're getting that return. So that's why I didn't ask individual questions, because there were so many based on that, but I felt like the story you were telling was more important and added up to this larger point, which is being really clear on the connection between values and strategy, and then what are you trying to get on return for any of those particular fundraising efforts.
Agree.
So Leslie, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to really work on this with me and to pick a couple of your many successful strategies. Congratulations on the institutionalized center there and having that beautiful place for people to be, and to having such a significant, albeit 15%, it is significant, 15% of your income as a community-based organization coming from this kind of fundraising. It's no small feat. So thank you for sharing your story. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.